What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Thank you so much for checking this video out. Today's story is a hard one. It's a real heavy story. There's a lot of incredible warriors who never came home from this operation. We're going to be reading through this story from the perspective of Sergeant Brian Anderson, who, as you are about to see, is the absolute definition of a hero. His story deserves to be told, and I believe it is incredibly important that everyone hears his story and remembers his name along with the names of all the other brave warriors that were on this operation. So I'm going to do my very best to honor them through the telling of their story today. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you want to help support the video, leave a like and a comment down below, and most importantly, watch the video all the way through. That will help boost the video up in the algorithm and make sure as many people as possible get to hear this incredible story. But thank you guys so much for watching. Let's get into it. October 5th, 2013. Specialist Brian Anderson was the platoon medic in a 75th Ranger Regiment assault force. Their target was a known Taliban attack network leader operating in the Kandahar province. Intelligence indicated that the HVT was the leader of an attack cell planning on conducting a high-profile attack in Kandahar city with the aims of killing innocent civilians. Specialist Anderson was a member of a combined strike force that planned an operation to kill or capture the HVT. The assault force planned to land on two separate named areas of interest, NAI-1 and NAI-2. The assault force departed from Kandahar airfield. Upon infiltration of NAI-1, the assault force moved to establish isolation of the targeted compound where the HVT was believed to be located. Upon landing, a squirter departed from the target compound and fled on foot to the northwest. Specialist Anderson had been tasked as the medic moving to support the squirter interdiction element. He linked up with the platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Torres, and moved on the west side towards the squirter. Behind Staff Sergeant Arnold and SRA Wendell, there was a detonation of at least 3 devices, to include an S-Vest explosive device and 2 pressure plate improvised explosive devices at the eastern gate of the target. These explosions resulted in at least 8 friendly casualties around the eastern gate of the compound, and 2 enemy killed in action, to include the female who was wearing and detonated the S-Vest. Without hesitation or concern for self-preservation, Specialist Anderson began moving alone 300 meters to the south towards the area in which casualties had been reported. He quickly radioed Staff Sergeant Torres to advise him that he was moving to the building by himself to assist with triage. Roughly 10 seconds later, an explosion occurred in the vicinity of the squirter, resulting in 1 additional enemy killed in action and 1 multi-purpose K9 Johnny killed in action. Specialist Anderson did not stop running until he reached the target area, which at this point in time was an active pressure plate IED belt. With no personal calculation of the existing threat to himself, Specialist Anderson moved to the first casualty he saw on the ground to the east of the breach, which was Sergeant Block. Staff Sergeant Rimley, the battalion's senior medic, was already treating Sergeant Block's eye injury and shrapnel wounds. Specialist Anderson began blood sweeps on Sergeant Block, but Staff Sergeant Rimley instructed Specialist Anderson to move on to the next patient. With no prior explosive clearance, Specialist Anderson ran past exploded IEDs and found Private First Class Pinnock lying on the ground, slightly to the east of Sergeant Block, and began his assessment. He cut open his shirt and found a puncture wound in his left chest, to which he applied a chest seal. Specialist Anderson then cut open Private First Class Pinnock's pants and found blood coming out of his lower abdomen, which he treated with combat gauze and a pressure dressing. All bleeding was controlled at this point, and Private First Class Pinnock's pulse was still strong. With Private First Class Pinnock's condition stabilized, Specialist Anderson remained in place and continued to provide verbal encouragement to his patient while scanning the area to find additional wounded assault force members who needed treatment. At this point, Staff Sergeant Horton, Staff Sergeant Rimley, Staff Sergeant Skinner, and Specialist Howard were the only personnel in the vicinity of the building who were not seriously wounded, although all were seriously concussed. Staff Sergeant Horton radioed for Staff Sergeant Hawkins to return to the target compound to assist in packaging and treating casualties, and notified the platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Torres, that the squirter interdiction element needed to return to the building to help with casualty evacuation. A casualty evacuation helicopter flight was requested by the ground force commander to evacuate the casualties from IED detonations. The first casualty evacuation helicopter landed. The personnel being evacuated included 7 wounded, to include the battalion's senior medic, Staff Sergeant Rimley, who was experiencing effects from the concussive blasts he had endured. With the extraction of 7 casualties and the deterioration of the medical support on the objective, there were not enough personnel remaining at the building compound to safely move the remaining wounded to the casualty evacuation helicopter. First Lieutenant Moreno, the Assault Force's cultural support team leader, who had also been assisting in treating casualties from the first 3 detonations, moved towards Staff Sergeant Horton to assist in the movement of Private First Class Pinnock to the casualty evacuation helicopter, which was now on the ground. While moving to Staff Sergeant Horton and Private First Class Pinnock, First Lieutenant Moreno detonated device number 5 and was killed in action. At this point, Specialist Patterson and Sergeant Hawkins were arriving at the compound. Sergeant Hawkins and Specialist Patterson then moved south towards Private First Class Pinnock, who was still being treated by Specialist Anderson. Specialist Patterson stepped on a pressure plate IED, stumbled, and triggered another pressure plate IED seconds later. Specialist Patterson and Sergeant Hawkins were mortally wounded by these detonations number 6 and 7. Which were less than 5 meters from Specialist Anderson. Specialist Anderson was blown over and was temporarily rendered senseless from the explosions. After checking himself for serious wounds, Specialist Anderson rapidly regained his composure and reassessed Private First Class Pinnock to ensure he had not been wounded by the additional blasts. At this time, with no concern for his own safety, Specialist Anderson again moved across the IED belt despite limited visibility due to explosive dust and debris. Specialist Anderson reached Sergeant Hawkins in the area he had fallen and began to assess his new casualty. Specialist Anderson assessed that Sergeant Hawkins had sustained catastrophic blast injuries from the IED. He suffered severe facial trauma, his left arm was amputated at the elbow, his abdomen was eviscerated, and his left leg was amputated. Despite the horrific condition of his fallen teammate, Specialist Anderson put pressure on Sergeant Hawkins' femoral artery, while Specialist Howard arrived and attempted to put a tourniquet on Sergeant Hawkins' left arm. Specialist Anderson diligently continued to sustain Sergeant Hawkins' life, but Sergeant Hawkins was able to only take 2 more breaths before he passed away. Realizing that he could no longer treat Sergeant Hawkins, Specialist Anderson unhesitatingly began to search for additional wounded he could treat. Sergeant Peters was returning to the compound from assisting with the medical evacuation of HLZ Egret when he triggered 2 pressure plate IEDs and was severely wounded. Detonations 8 and 9. Without hesitation, Specialist Anderson got up and ran through the uncleared area to Sergeant Peters, just as Staff Sergeant Skinner was also arriving at Sergeant Peters' side. Sergeant Peters had bilateral amputation of his lower extremities. Specialist Anderson put pressure on his legs and worked with Staff Sergeant Skinner to apply tourniquets. Sergeant Dawson and SRA Wendell soon arrived and cleared a path through the IED belt to Sergeant Peters. Sergeant Peters soon lost consciousness and stopped breathing. Specialist Anderson and SRA Wendell were performing a cricothyrotomy on Sergeant Peters when Corporal Hargis stepped on a pressure plate IED. Detonation number 10. While moving to aid Sergeant Peters, the IED amputated both of Corporal Hargis's legs. This blast occurred 5 meters to the northwest of Specialist Anderson. After the dust began settling from this explosion, SRA Wendell finished the cricothyrotomy on Sergeant Peters. Sergeant Dawson then cleared a path to Corporal Hargis with Specialist Anderson. Specialist Anderson had no tourniquets remaining at this point and dug his knees deep into what remained of Corporal Hargis's legs to stop the bleeding. Staff Sergeant Torres gave Specialist Anderson his tourniquet to place on Corporal Hargis's left leg. And while they were working on Corporal Hargis, Sergeant Peters passed away. SRA Wendell moved to assist Specialist Anderson with Corporal Hargis and administered a needle compression on Corporal Hargis's collapsed lung. Corporal Hargis had no radial pulse. Specialist Anderson placed a saline lock in Corporal Hargis's right arm. He then pumped 500 milliliters of Hex-10 to boost Corporal Hargis's blood pressure. Specialist Anderson continued to render treatment and encouragement, which kept Corporal Hargis alive for almost an hour and 40 minutes until he could be evacuated. During this time, realizing he could no longer safely move through the area, Specialist Anderson continued to provide verbal direction to the remaining first responders and medical technicians throughout the objective area. Elements from Strike Force 2 QRF fast roped into HLZ Egret and cleared a path through the active IED belt to the casualties in vicinity of the compound. Specialist Anderson moved to the casualty evacuation with Corporal Hargis and was extracted from the objective area. Specialist Anderson had kept Corporal Hargis alive for 1 hour and 37 minutes and 30 seconds with 2 catastrophic leg amputations on an objective area laden with explosives. Specialist Anderson continued to treat Corporal Hargis on the aircraft until it returned to Kandahar Airfield. Specialist Anderson carried Corporal Hargis to the ambulance waiting on the airfield and accompanied Corporal Hargis into the emergency room at Kandahar Airfield's hospital. Specialist Anderson endured a total of 7 IEDs or SVES blasts from a distance of no more than 10 meters within the course of 30 minutes. Around 10 additional IEDs that did not explode were detected in the immediate area by EOD technicians. Despite exposure to 2 close proximity blasts and effects of early onset traumatic brain injury, Specialist Anderson gathered himself at multiple times while continuing to treat patients under the most chaotic and terrifying conditions. He repeatedly moved through the objective area within an active IED belt to administer aid to 5 different patients, without his path being cleared by EOD technicians. His utter disregard for his own safety to treat fellow comrades was astounding, and his efforts to perform intricate and complicated medical procedures with minimal equipment were incredible. Specialist Anderson directly contributed to saving Private First Class Penix and Corporal Hargis's lives. With the exception of EOD technicians, Specialist Anderson was the most actively mobile Strike Force member on the objective. His attempts to save Sergeant Hawkins and Sergeant Peters' lives while directly risking his own are admirable beyond description. Specialist Anderson is a credit to the training and dedication of all Ranger medics, who in the hour of greatest crisis rise to the occasion to save their fellow Rangers and teammates with no consideration for their own well-being. Specialist Anderson heroically embodied the Ranger creed throughout the night, and was willing to give his life rather than leave a fallen comrade. His actions contributed to saving the lives of other members of the assault force and disrupted a major attack in Kandahar City that would have resulted in the deaths of unknown multitudes of innocent lives. Throughout his distinctive accomplishments, Specialist Anderson's actions were exceptional and reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the Department of Defense. And Specialist Anderson received the Distinguished Service Cross for his incredible actions that night. I have also covered this story in a separate video, but from the perspective of the EOD technician, Sergeant First Class Jeffrey Dawson. I'll have that linked on the screen for you guys somewhere, as well as down in the description if you want to check that out. Just in the same way Brian Anderson did, Sergeant Dawson on multiple different occasions moved through the uncleared IED field to save other Rangers and just had complete disregard for his own well-being throughout the night. And to Brian Anderson and all the other warriors on this mission, it has been a genuine honor sharing your story here today. Thank you so much for your sacrifice and for your service. And with that, that is the end of today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know down in the comment section what you guys thought of this story and this video. If you haven't already been to the gym today at the time watching this video, get to the gym, get a good workout in, man. Fitness is important. It's a path that I'm on myself and I'm striving to get better at each and every day. And along with getting your body right, guys, you got to get your spiritual life in order as well. If you don't have a Bible, go buy yourself a Bible, start reading it every morning. You can get it for free on a phone app. I'm telling you guys, if you have never done it before, it will change your life. But I hope you guys have a fantastic day. Thank you so much for checking out this video, and I will see you guys in the next one.